Hello and welcome back to my RC channel. I am AndyRC and today I'm going to be taking a look at the HBFPV HB64 one cell brushless tiny whoop. And I'm really on the fence about this one because it seems like a really nice package and I think a lot of people are going to like it. However, this one has turned up with some quality control issues that is making me think, should I recommend it or not? And I think a lot of people are going to like it, and if you got one in perfect working order, then maybe this would be the best brushless tiny whoop that there is. But yeah, I'm not too sure about it. But before I get onto the issues, let's take a look at it. So it comes in a tub. I always like a model that comes in a tub, and you'll see straight away it really is tiny. If I take the Eachine E010, you can see it is the same size as it, so it's tiny whoop size. If you compare it to the Tiny 7X, this is a bigger and heavier model. So it weighs just 24 grams without a battery. You get given a 260 milliamp high volt battery, and it weighs 31 grams with the battery. So very light. The brushless motors, they are a 0603 16,000 kV. You can see the props are a very similar size to tiny whoop props, but they're just a little bit thicker. You're given a spare set of the props there, and you're also given a 90-degree USB adapter, and that is because it's quite tricky to get a USB cable in there. If you've got a really thin one you can, but otherwise you can put that through the top there. And we've got a prop remover, and then we have a schematic of the flight controller. The ESCs are a 4-in-1. They are BL S 16.7. It supports D-Shot 600. The flight controller is a F3 flight controller. It has Betaflight on-screen display, and it's flash with Betaflight version 3.17. So there's no beeper on this flight controller. However, if we look at the schematic, you can add a buzzer, but that would up the weight. So I would do D-Shot commands. I thought it was interesting that we have 16.7 on here, but we only have 317 on the flight controller, so you can't do D-Shot commands. You'd have to upgrade it to 3.2 and above, and I'd recommend doing that, you know, for your lost model alarm. And then we have this canopy on the top there. It's quite a tall canopy there. And this is the FlySky 2A version. So it actually came with a receiver in this package, and you have to install it yourself. So 2 screws here, lift the canopy up, and it's just a 3-pin JST plug, so it just plugs straight in. You've got a sticky back foam on the receiver, and that can just stick onto the flight controller. And what I would say is maybe bind it to your transmitter before putting the canopy back on, because it's quite tricky to reach these buttons. We have an all-in-one camera up the front, so it's a CMOS camera and also a VTX. It is 25 milliwatt, 48 channel. We have the usual 2 buttons, so the one at the front switches between PAL and NTSC and also reverses the image, flips it upside down. And then the one at the back, it's a short press to change your 8 channels, and then a long press for your bands. And we just have a little antenna coming out the top there. It doesn't come out very far, so I'll have to see what the reception is like. Now, it did come with some Betaflight setup, but there was a lot I had to change. So it had motor stop on, which is kind of standard for a tiny whoop, but I still like to have motor stop off. It didn't have air mode permanently on, and as this is 3.17, there's no anti-gravity. It had stock PIDs, stock rates, and also had the horrible sidebars and the artificial horizon on the on-screen display, so I changed that as well. I would recommend updating this to the latest version of Betaflight because 3.17 is a little bit old now. If you are going for brushless, then you are probably going for it to have D-Shot commands, so turtle mode. That's one thing I get asked all the time. How can I use turtle mode on my tiny whoop? You can't on brushed because it's a D-Shot command, but you can with this one because, you know, D-Shot ESC, but you would have to upgrade the flight controller's firmware, as I say. So yeah, you could have beacon on for your lost model alarm, you could do turtle mode, and also the brushless motor, it shouldn't wear as quickly as a brush motor, so that's a reason to go for brushless. So what are the issues that I had with this thing? Well, I set everything up, I plugged the battery in, and I armed it, and the thing was spinning really quickly in one direction. And I had a look at the settings, everything seemed fine, and then I noticed, can you see the direction of the props here? They are on the opposite way, so I thought, that's interesting, but it was sort of spinning violently, so I wondered if they had done the clean air mod. Now, if you don't know, clean air mod is where you put the props on the other way around, and the idea is apparently you get less prop wash oscillations. I've never found that, and also it stops grass and water being flung into your camera because the motors are spinning the other way around. Now, my argument for this is that the majority of the time, instead, it flings it into your flight controller and your USB connector, so I tend to not use it. So when I went into BL Heli Suite, the motor direction was correct for these propellers spinning in the other direction. However, when I went into the CLI in Betaflight, it didn't have the yaw command in there to reverse the yaw. So I actually think that this was an oversight. I don't think they were going for the clean air mod. I think this was just someone inexperienced building this model. They have put the props on the wrong way around and got the motor direction the wrong way around. Either that, or they were going for a clean air mod and they just forgot to put the one command in. Either way, if you are new to this and you're buying this as a RTF, you might not be able to discover that, and you know, maybe that is why I wouldn't recommend it, because unless you find my video, you might not know how to fix it, and you probably end up contacting Banggood and saying, why is it spinning out of control? So when I was looking at the motor direction of this thing, I individually spun the motors up, and two of them were sounding rough as anything, and the entire copter was vibrating. And then two of the other motors were absolutely fine. And when I take a closer look at these motors, I think two of them either have a bow that is misshapen or the shaft is bent, because when I spin the motor around, it does not spin around symmetrically. I think you might just be able to see there that it's not spinning symmetrically. So it's this one here and this one here as well, although you can't see it as well on this one. And I think that's going to affect the performance. You see, when I flew this thing with a fully charged high volt battery, it was hovering at 50%, and when I throttled up, it had a fair amount of power, but I can't help but think these unbalanced motors is going to be causing it to have less power than it should. You see, I've seen a few people make a video where they've put a different motor on every single arm and they're surprised that it flies, but actually it's the flight controller that compensates for that. So the copter will only perform as good as its weakest component. So if I've got two weak motors here, then it'll fly alright, but it won't have the performance because it will be down tuning the two motors that are working fine in order to keep it flying nicely. So again, I'm struggling to recommend this, and it's going to be hard for me to do a punch out with this one when I think two of my motors are unbalanced. Well, I'll do a punch test anyways, just to see what it is like, but as you can see, that's above 50% throttle to get it hovering. So let's do a punch with it. That's not got much power at all. I have flown it inside and it was enough power for inside, but definitely not outside. I would say that some of the brush models have more power than this, but again, could be those motors that are doing that. That is your lot, and I really think it would struggle to recover from any acro maneuver outdoors because it's struggling to recover from punches. yeah, but it's losing its stability there. I have no doubt that if I flick it into acro mode, then it's even gonna struggle. Had to put full throttle on the recovery, but I was able to do a flip. Now I should say it is windy here today, but yeah, full throttle on the recovery to acro, but it can just about do it. But you know, the majority of models that you're going to be flying in acro, you shouldn't be over 50% throttle just to get it to hover, and full throttle to recover. But as I say, indoors it should be fine. But my opinion of this one I've got is the brushed versions are better, more powerful and cheaper. Oh, it got caught by the wind there. I'm struggling to bring it back. It does not drift in angle mode, which is good, because you know, the majority of people are going to be flying it in angle mode. But I think it's time to bring it in. So as I mentioned earlier, this thing is much more suited for indoors. It did take me a little bit of time to get used to hovering at above 50% throttle, and I started to bash into stuff, but I quickly got used to that. I think there is something that I could change, perhaps in the throttle settings in the transmitter or in Betaflight, so that it hovers at a more normal percentage value on the throttle. But there you go. So I decided to test the range out a little bit, and the video reception I thought was pretty good. You do have to remember that I'm using a true diversity system from Furious FPV in conjunction with a Menace Bandicoot linear patch antenna and a aomway cloverleaf antenna. It really does make a difference to the picture quality. But I was happy to see that the range on the receiver was pretty good. I could get all around the house with that as well, so that's a positive there. I also think that the video is really clean. Now it's a CMOS camera and we have got a high exposure situation with the light coming through the windows there, but I'm still able to see everything. It's just the outside that is washed out. And once I got used to the throttle position, I was able to thread the needle quite nicely. And I also noticed as well that if you bash into stuff, it doesn't really get unsettled that much. That's something that can happen with a tiny whip. Just takes a little clip and it can get a little bit unsettled. But I was bashing into all sorts of stuff here and it was quite easy on the recovery, and I found it really stable indoors as well. It felt really unstable when flying it outside, but inside when there's no wind whatsoever, then yeah, it was much easier to thread the needle. So again, I'm really on the fence because yeah, I had a lot of fun with this one as soon as I was flying it indoors, but you know, Banggood sent this to me for free and I was annoyed that it had quality control issues. So how annoyed would you be if you'd paid, you know, I think it's like £95 for it and it had those issues, you know? You'd have to buy 2 spare motors, or at least get them to send you 2 motors that, you know, you would have to solder on yourself. And, you know, so I just think about that really. But I do understand that there are going to be people who've received this and they think it's the best thing ever, and yeah, that's absolutely fine. And I would say, you know, maybe look out for other reviews. I actually looked on Banggood's site and they weren't listing this at the moment, so, you know, keep an eye on that as well. Perhaps, you know, they realised that they'd been built with the motor direction all changed and maybe other people were having this issue. I don't know. They haven't mentioned anything like that. And I've noticed as a reviewer, I tend to try and find the worst out of the model rather than the best. And there are some really good things about this model, despite the fact I think I've got two duff motors and the setup was a little bit clunky. So I like the on-screen display. It's got a great flight time, nearly a 4-minute flight time, and it's not so bad indoors despite the motor issues, despite the setup issues. So, you know, if you are interested in this model, I'll link it in the below, and maybe it will become available again at some point, but I will leave the review there. So as always, thanks so much for watching. Please continue to subscribe. Cheers.